Hi, my name is Robbie Loretto, and for my quiz 2, I chose to talk about the book Bricktop that we're reading, and it's just because it's my favorite book thus far. And I like it just not only for who Bricktop was, but the book just makes you want to continue to keep reading. From what I've read so far, I see Bricktop as being a woman who has pride and respect, from which she both got from her mother, Hattie. Hattie instilled great mannerism in her children, and although Bricktop was more of a curious child, you recognize the respect that she had for her mother throughout the book, and respect for herself most times. Bricktop lost her father when she was just a child, I think when she was 4 years old. Thereafter, she was raised by her mother with her other siblings. Her mother was all about new experiences and opportunity for her children, but love and protection for her children was of great value. For instance, Bricktop had the opportunity to be adopted by a white family that her mother was working for, and Bricktop would have been well taken care of, but her mother just couldn't imagine not being able to see her daughter again. And when her mother decided that they were going to move to Chicago, the people of her hometown were pretty shocked because a small town family moving to a big city just didn't sit right with them. And the people told Hattie that her family would starve, and Hattie's response was, "Well, my family will starve together." And that's just how Hattie was. Her family was her life, and she wouldn't let anything come between that. And although Bricktop stated that her mother wasn't too affectionate while growing up and throughout her life, the protection that her mother had for them is what made up for it. And there are many times in the book that Hattie protects her family, whether it was being from allowing her children to see multiple partners amongst the people her mother would rent out rooms to, or just roomers within the city. Bricktop had an upbringing that was pretty common in the early 1900s as she grew up in Chicago. Her manners were well in place from her mother, and when her mother was out of sight, Bricktop was this girl who just tested her limits. She tested everyone and everything. Even the neighbors saw how Bricktop was, and they suggested that she be sent away to correctional school. And it was such a big thing that the people were signing petitions for her to be sent away. But when Bricktop's mother found out about it, she obviously put a stop to it. Bricktop was sneaky, and she was like a little sneaky girl full of energy. She would run errands for her neighbors. She would get sent home from school with letters about her behavior. And with all of her energy, she was able to perform at school and plays that they had. And that's when the love of performing aroused for Bricktop. Bricktop continued performing in plays that she could at school, and one day she caught a lucky break because there was a company there watching, and they asked if Bricktop could perform at an even bigger play for them that they were hosting. Her mother was hesitant at first because it required the children to miss school for a handful of days so they could rehearse. But Bricktop convinced her mother to allow her to take the offer, and as obedient Bricktop was to her mother, she stuck with her promise of completing all of her schoolwork. And she continued performing in her shows, but at one of the plays, there was this officer who showed up and told all the children that they couldn't perform until they were 16 because they needed to go to school first. So Bricktop had to put that on hold, and she waited until she was 16 and she dropped out of school. And in the book, it said that was her biggest mistake of her life, was not finishing school. And as I continued to read the book, I think Bricktop was an ambitious woman who really wouldn't let anything get in the way of her capturing her dreams. With her great deal of aspiration, she was able to become famous and someone who was of common familiarity among the people at the time. At age 18, after her ordeal with getting stranded on her first tour, she just wanted to get off the road and start in the saloons. And she felt that she fit right in with the pimps and the prostitutes. And we would think, like, oh my goodness, what is she doing? But she stated that the only reason that she felt comfortable around them was because they made her feel protected. And I feel that's one of the reasons for her being with Walter, the love of her life, because she was protected her entire life by her mother. Her mother loved her, protected her no matter what. And even though that Walter was a pimp and a drug addict, she still loved him, and it's just because he probably gave her that same mother feeling, like, I don't know, that her mom gave her. But I'll touch base with that at the end of this. So in the saloons, she became pretty well known. She was so well known that Jack Johnson, the famous boxer that we've been talking about, personally asked her to work for him. And Bricktop was the type of person who was strictly business rather than play. And one good example is when one of her bosses, I think his name was Billy, he wanted Bricktop, and he gave her a diamond ring, and just as like so much pride that Bricktop had, she took the ring, but she still did what she wanted to do. She didn't let anyone like hold her down or anything, and Billy didn't like it, so he took the ring back and fired her. But then again, she didn't let that take any of her sleep at night. She basically was on to the next job she could find. Bricktop was so used to the saloons at the time that she no longer really liked being on stage. She didn't like the fact that she couldn't see the reaction of the audience. And in the book, it said that it was as though she was playing to a sea of darkness. So she stuck with the saloons, and as I mentioned earlier, she felt the protection from the pimps, so much so that her only beloved was a pimp named Walter. Back then, the women, mainly the prostitutes, brought the money to the pimps, but Walter didn't mind that Bricktop was a performer who didn't make as much as the prostitutes did at the time. And as we may have seen, again, that Bricktop's full of pride. It's obvious. It really was obvious, because she was with this opium addict, and he messed around with other women to get money and gold chains and all whatever the pimps did. But Bricktop didn't like really let it bother her. She was so full of pride that what she did was accept it, and she loved that she was his first choice, and she would wear the gold chains around like, oh, this is mine, but one of the prostitutes really bought it for Walter. So I thought that was pretty funny. That's where I'm going to cut off talking about the book, because I don't want to spoil it for anyone else who hasn't continued reading more than we are supposed to. So the reason I enjoy and I chose to talk about this book was just the ambition and how I saw Bricktop being so independent. As brokenhearted she was when Walter left her because of his habits, she didn't depend on him for her happiness. She continued to concentrate on herself and her success. When she first started performing, the show was canceled and they were stranded, and her mother had to send her money to get back to Chicago. She didn't go home and cry about it, and she didn't give up. She continued to seek for more opportunity. And like I said, her mentality was business over play. Everything she did on and off stage, this was like another aspect that I really liked was that everything she did, whether she was on stage or off, she always had her family in the back of her mind, and I do believe that they are her motivation. So that's it for now. Thank you.